Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 14, Part 16, The Face of Confession. Vashna looked at her love, who had kept a carefully blank face, as she dropped the bombshell that she'd be gone before he returned from witnessing the humans-police action war. She finally reached out to touch his face and felt a tear form at the corner of her eye. I don't want to go. I know he doesn't want me to either. He is probably sitting there contemplating telling me to defy my mother, that no family matron can force an adult of their family to do something. Oh, my love, if you only knew. I have to leave, but I don't want to leave you. I can't bring you with me either, as much as I might like. You are far too important here. I don't like you being here and at risk either, but... She shook her head to clear it. But I love you, Annabelle. No, stop. I mean that deeply. Not the blithe, I love you we have been exchanging the last few weeks. Not the kind-spirited, happy, emotional high of affection. You are a beautiful soul and a glorious man. Smart, kind, witty, compassionate, humble despite your accomplishments and capabilities, caring, strong of character, and possessing a courage you don't even begin to understand about yourself. You are most of everything I ever thought I'd want in a man, and all I never understood, until this last week or so, after Mother told me I was going to be recalled, that I needed. I don't want my departure to be the end of us, my love. I think we can keep this going over the years and across the light years, until this place, she gestured broadly with one hand, is past the crises the humans are pushing all of us to, and you can lay down this burden and come to me. I know that may be a lot to ask, but I will do all I can to make it work. My personal accounts are rich enough to afford QCOM machines, and we will be in daily contact. I also know it's asking a lot for you to, eventually, give up the career you have worked so hard for, but I promise that it won't be for naught. You will, when we are properly together, have plenty of chance to use your skills. I swear this to you. She forced herself to smile at him and tried to give him a small chuckle. It came out more as a gasp, but she continued to speak. Besides, who knows? If the humans get their way entirely, it could be years before the crisis comes to a head, and by then, maybe you will... Inibal leaned forward and put a finger to her lips, then impishly kissed her nose. He seemed to stare deep into her soul with eyes of burning passion. Not lusty passion, though. The sort of passionate, deep love that she'd just confessed to him. And then he smiled, and that passion took on a merry glint. He suddenly backed up and began to move away from her, after a micro-expression glance towards his dresser. Oh no! Oh gods and goddesses, he isn't! Of course he is, you stupid girl. Isn't that what you just did? What do you expect? Of course he already has a necklace waiting. He began to bound out of the bed, but she managed, just, to catch his wrist and pull him back. He tried to pull away from her with a wink and an impish grin, but she pulled hard against him. He turned back with a puzzled expression, then a sober one as another tear rolled down her cheek. Fear and sadness rolled through Inibal. Too soon, you dolt. She just told you, in so many words, that she expects to take a few years before we take that sort of step. And here you go, bounding straight for the necklace. Stupid. Stupid. Another tear rolled down Vashna's cheek, but an odd smile crept onto her face. If he didn't know better, he'd call that smile relived. She finally let go of his wrist and reached up to stroke his face, her head shaking slightly. Oh, my darling Annabelle, how did you capture my heart so? She sighed deeply. I want that, my love. I do. She took a moment to look pointedly at the dresser where he'd hidden her engagement necklace, then bit her lip and looked shy, uncertain, hesitant. His heart began to thud in his chest. He set the thought aside to concentrate on her as his own hearts fluttered. He'd never seen her hesitate about anything. Even the one time that Kasla had talked, almost ordered her to put armor on, she'd stepped out onto the field with decisiveness and gusto. Now, though, what in the name of all creation could make my lovely woman hesitate? She turned shimmering eyes up to him and spoke with a voice that carried none of her usual strength. It made him want to wrap his arms around her and hold her until all the bad things went away. Heavens and hells help him It made him want to don armor of his own, and he shuddered at the thought. Charge off to slay whatever foul beast made this paragon of strength he'd fallen in love with hesitate. He settled for taking her hand in both of his and nodding encouragement. She grasped his hand like he'd thrown her a lifeline as she spoke.
You know I'm highborn.
She sighed.
Well, even in that I haven't been as honest with you as I wish I could have been. I mean, it isn't something I really told you. It is just something that was too obvious for you not to realize. And I am glad we were able to at least talk around it, and...
She stopped, closed her eyes, sighed heavily again. When she opened them, she seemed even more vulnerable than before, and his heart nearly bled at the sight. She finally continued,
Still, even with you knowing that, I haven't been totally honest with you.
She shook her head and he felt his eyebrows go down.
No, not like that. I haven't lied to you, not exactly. Except maybe by a lie of omission. You see, yes, I am highborn. It is just I am.
He tried to protest, tried to tell her how much he didn't care about whatever it was. She held her hand up and looked away slightly.
No, stop. Don't sit there and try to comfort me or tell me words you may have to take back in just a moment.
He began to protest again, and her eyes immediately went sharp for just a moment. Enough to set him back on his heels before the vulnerability returned.
No, darling, let me get this out before you say a word. Because I want that thing you were going to retrieve. I do. With all my being, I do. But I have to tell you this first. You have to know just exactly who you are really giving it to, and what it will mean for you and the rest of your life.
She laughed nervously, then began to shake as the laughter threatened to become hysterical. Hannibal opened his mouth and leaned forward, one hand reaching out to her in an attempt to comfort her, but the movement seemed to bring her back to herself, and that hard, flinty look flashed across her eyes again. She held him with it until he settled himself down. Then she chuckled, shook her head, and turned back to him.
I haven't hesitated about anything like this since I was 5 years old, and I tried to go around my mother to Uncle K.
She harumphed.
That didn't turn out so well. Let's hope that this one turns out better.
She locked her eyes onto his.
Inibal, well, you see.
She closed her eyes and dropped her chin. Her voice, when it came out this time, nearly tore his heart in twain. Small, timid, unsure. Everything he knew she wasn't.
I can't. Me, who is expected to stare down warships and empires if needed, can't even confess the reality of myself to the man I love.
Another dark chuckle issued from her, and a sorrowful grin spread across her face. Her eyes sprang on open, and once again locked with his. This time they held flint and steel, but still that vulnerability that made him want to charge into battle.
I will just have to show you. Please, just let me do this. Stay quiet and don't answer until I finish showing you what I need to.
In that moment, sitting there staring into her brilliant eyes, he could have denied her nothing. If she'd asked him to carry her to the sun, he'd have scooped her up and started jumping. He held her gaze and nodded. This was no time for mere words. That sad smile broadened slightly, and then her face began to change. Small, subtle shifts. Her cheekbones deflating a touch, her brows shifted a little, her jawline moved a fraction. A dozen tiny little shifts of her face. Wonder, curiosity, and, he couldn't tell from where, an impending sense of dread crept into him as he watched her features change. For the rest of his life, try as he might, he could never figure out how long he'd sat there watching her face change. He'd been told the process took 3 to 5 minutes, and it could have been that. Or it could have been under a second. Or it could have been 1,000 years. As each change stopped, that rising dread crept closer to him. Some part of him, it seemed, knew what he was about to discover and tried to deny it. He sat there, lost in rapt attention, as her features congealed into... He bounded out of the bed in a blind panic. Awareness of just who he'd been manhandling these last months blossomed into his mind and found himself on his floor, kneeling on one knee, head down and hand up in supplication, his entire body quivering in... He wasn't even going to try to process all of that now. The princess. I have been dating the princess. I have been... No, don't even think about that. Does Her Majesty know? His hands went nearly black in their blush, and his heart thudded in his hands and throat. Her Majesty. Blind panic set in, and his vision focused on the computer with a direct line to the Empress. Maybe if I apologize now that I know... He nearly leapt across the room and jammed his finger on the button to power the computer on, barely even registering the protests of Vashna as he moved. It took precious seconds for the machine to come online, and he could hear the princess, oh gods and goddesses, the princess, move in a panic of her own. Her words managed, a little, to cut through the tunnel vision he had on the computer.
Enable, what are you doing? Please, I am sorry,
Something in the tone of her voice set off that strange courage of his again, and his panic receded just enough for him to realize that he was acting the fool. He reached up to shut the computer off, and then his heart froze as the screen went blank and showed him a reflection of the naked princess behind him on his bed for a brief moment, and then the screen flashed to life to show a slightly grumpy looking Empress staring at him.
This had best be important, boy. I was just about to go to bed with my...
The woman stopped, looked at him, looked over his shoulder, and her eyes widened for a moment. Enable felt his vision darkening and realized he was about to faint. Then the Empress of the Venter Empire, the Queen of a Trillion Souls, the righteous defender of all sapient life, threw her head back and chortled a long, hard laugh. Nebel's vision returned to normal as the laughter died, and his mental state shifted from blind panic to confused. He then looked at his monarch and realized she sat there in her bathrobe, merriment still on her features. She saved him from stammering by speaking first.
You up and tried to hang an engagement necklace on her, didn't you?